All right, this is first in a series on different things for pre-service teachers and new teachers. The reason this project came about is I surveyed my educational technology class and asked them several questions, but one of them was, what are some things you need to know before you step into a classroom so you will feel ready? And a lot of them said they needed to develop their self-confidence. So I'm kind of taking these in order. So that's what this week's is going to be on. These will be posted every Thursday night throughout the semester until I run out of material. So let's talk about developing our self-confidence. If I can get it to work. All right. So what is self-confidence? Well, it's pretty easy to know. We all know what it is. But it's basically knowing what you're doing, feeling secure, feeling like you belong, being a valued part of a team. I think the belonging and knowing what you're doing are big parts of that. Feeling prepared is self-confident. Having a win or something go well is part of self-confidence. And seasoned teachers can lose their self-confidence, but it's easy for new teachers to lose their self-confidence and then find it hard to regain. When you've had success before in the past, it's easy to regain your self-confidence in something. But if you've never had it, it might never come unless something is done. So the first thing I would ask anybody if they came to me and said, well, I'm having trouble with my self-confidence, I would say, tell me an area in your life where you've developed self-confidence over time. And that could be playing a sport, an instrument, or just going to college. Everybody gets the jitters their first day of anything. I'm sure many students their first day of college were like, I don't know if I can do this or not. But by the time they get to be a sophomore or a junior or a senior, then, going to college is just like going to middle school, going to elementary school. You're just used to it. Going to high school. Starting a new job is another one. I mean, if you get a job as a barista at Starbucks and you get trained, still, I'm sure your first week on the job, you're not completely confident in what you're doing. But if you do it for a while, then you get that feeling of confidence. And new teachers need to understand that no principal expects them to walk into the job on the first day, especially in student teaching, but particularly if they get hired, and be perfect at it. So that self-confidence and having a realistic understanding of what your skills are going to be, that's going to help you grow and develop self-confidence instead of having an unrealistic expectation. So some things I would watch out for that will hurt your self-confidence are as follows. First of all, imposter syndrome, which is pretty, I would say it's almost a pop culture type thing. People talk about this a lot more than they used to. Imposter syndrome is a feeling of I don't belong here, I don't belong in this, I'm not good enough for this, all of these other people belong here. It's your typical, if you think of, somebody from a lower socioeconomic situation, and they're at Harvard among all of these elite people and kids with trust funds and that sort of thing, and they have this imposter syndrome. It's something that just happens. And people from lower middle class to poor backgrounds are more susceptible to this than others. It's just from never having been there. The kid that, somebody has to pull aside and say, oh man, you're not even tying your tie right. Most people experience this in their life, but especially people from lower SES situations do. And this feeling can be reinforced by coworkers and leaders if they make you feel as if you don't belong. And while they might not realize what effect that's having on your psyche, you certainly do. And so that's one you have to watch out for. And people need to understand, especially new teachers and student teachers need to understand, you do belong. You've done the work. You've gotten the teaching license. You belong here. And it's easy to step back and be, oh yeah, I don't fit in there. But there's a place for everybody. You just have to find it. Another one is overthinking. And this happens a lot to young people, where they lie in bed at night and stress over what what they said that day? Why didn't they speak up? Why did that person say that to me? And they overthink and they overthink. And while everybody is special and unique and all of that, oftentimes we get into this sort of solipsism where we feel like people are noticing us or paying attention to us a lot more than they actually are. And so we think of one misstated thing during the day and make a huge deal out of it in our minds, but really for the outside world, nobody even noticed it. So you have to be careful not to overthink, because the more you do that, the more you are hurting your self-confidence, because you're questioning yourself and doubting yourself. And all of that's rooted in your esteem. Another killer for self-confidence is unstable relationships / home life. So if things aren't going well outside of work, if you're new at something especially, it's going to be hard to find solace at work from those things. So that instability at home is going to make things pretty unstable at work. So you have to create this sort of environment of comfort and stability for yourself, or it's going to feel like everything in the world is crashing down around against you. And if the closer you can get, or the sooner you can develop confidence at work, sometimes work can be a shelter for those things at home. But if you are new in a job, a new teacher, and you're doubting yourself and you're working hard and everybody goes through it, if things at home are bad as well, then that's going to make it worse. And finally, we do a lot of things to sabotage ourselves and make things harder on ourselves. A poor work ethic is really bad for your self-confidence, because it's going to create a hole out of which it is very hard to crawl. So the first thing I would say is poor planning. If I look back at new teachers with whom I have worked and had experience, and even myself, things went well when I planned well. Things didn't go well when I didn't plan well. And this is something I'll revisit when I talk about classroom management. Really the cornerstone to good classroom management is planning. And we don't think of it that way. We think of planning as just being, well, is it a good lesson or not? But it's really the cornerstone of your work. Also, procrastination. A lot of students build very, very bad habits in college around procrastination. And sometimes it's because you overextend yourself and you take 18 hours and work 2 jobs, and you always feel like you're working at the last minute, so you feel like you work your best in that situation. And I'll tell you, you cannot convince me that you do. I've seen a lot of memes and other things that say that, oh yeah, if procrastination's so bad, then why am I making A's on my papers I turn in at the last minute? And it makes me want to say, well, if you were working ahead of time and revising your papers, you could probably be submitting them to conferences rather than just for homework. So procrastination is bad, especially for working a job. Avoidance and dissociating with things. Usually those are responses to professional shame. And so total avoidance. Avoidance is best characterized by housework or laundry, where it just piles up to the point that you're overwhelmed by it and you just avoid it entirely. And then disorganization will lead to a lower self-confidence, because it is hard to work in a disorganized environment. Your students will not behave as well in a disorganized environment. And again, that goes back to planning. So let's talk about building confidence. How do we break the cycle of having low self-confidence? The first thing I would say, if you are a new teacher, you have to find a mentor, but a good one. And there are people are complex beings, and not everybody is anything or all the things, but a good mentor is important. Look for somebody energetic and confident, and somebody who doesn't complain, gossip, or talk bad about other people. If somebody acts like they hate their job, you do not want that person as a mentor. If somebody is hateful to kids, you do not want that person as a mentor. If somebody sits at their desk all day rather than walking and being up and around and helping students, you don't want them as a mentor. Bad mentors are people who act miserable, and they're going to make you miserable. They're also going to lump you into the miserable group of people in a building, and they always exist in every building. And I don't know if that's a function of group dynamics or just the state of education. But avoid miserable people. Look for energetic, confident, and happy people. They'll be good mentors to you. And that's who you need to emulate. And it doesn't matter. A mentor can be somebody who's taught 5 years or somebody who's taught 50 years. But it's all about their outward demeanor. They're going to be a good mentor to you because they found the secret. Ask questions. Never be satisfied with not knowing. And I've often found that new teachers are afraid to ask a bunch of questions because they think it makes them seem incompetent. We've all been there. We know you don't know it all. There's no way for a pre-service teacher program to teach it all to you. There's a lot of on-the-job stuff that you won't even learn in student teaching. So ask questions. The Dunning-Kruger effect basically states that incompetent people don't realize they are incompetent. I have an offshoot of that where incompetent people don't ask questions because they don't want to seem incompetent. So you have to understand when you first start teaching, out of student teaching, out of university, you know some stuff, you can do the job, but still, compared to somebody who's been doing it for 5 years, you're going to be fairly incompetent because of your inexperience. You're going to have to learn some things. You're going to have to learn some tough lessons. And we're willing to overlook and help you through some of that because we know that your students are going to gain from you in that position. That's why we hired you. But that we didn't hire you because we thought you were perfect. We hired you because we thought over a period of 3 to 5 years, you're going to become exactly what we want. So you have to understand the biggest sign of maturity to me in new teachers is they ask questions. Immaturity is when you don't ask questions and do things the wrong way and get into all sorts of trouble and problems with people, and then you've got a mess on your hands. That seems immature to me. Another part is just fake it until you make it. Whether you're self-confident or not, you need to dress the part, act the part, look around, see how everybody else acts. If you're acting totally different than that, you probably need to rein it in a little bit. Be comfortable with saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. If your students ask you a question, again, you are a content area expert. We get that. But that doesn't mean you know everything. So if somebody asks you a question you don't know, even if it's something you should know, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And then, go look it up. Or model that with students. Hey, let's look this up together. But humility is very important in teaching. And so you also need to learn to laugh at yourself, because people who take themselves too seriously are rarely taken seriously by anybody else. So you can't come in with this air of, I know everything, I refuse to act like I don't know something, I'm going to argue with people even when I'm wrong, because all of those are symptoms that you are lacking in confidence, and you are trying to cover it up by being somewhat of a tyrant. Also, be authentic. Be yourself. It's easy to spot a phony. And usually the people that are being inauthentic in schools, new teachers, are know-it-alls who have no experience. So they act like they know everything, but they haven't experienced anything to make that claim, to have that attitude. So just be authentic. Don't act like you know when you don't know. Just be yourself and learn to laugh at yourself, and just realize that you're on if you're going to stick it out your entire career, you're on a 30-year journey. It's not a short journey. It's a long one. And you're going to get there. And you're going to do well enough to get tenure. If you listen, ask questions, and do all of the things that it takes to do, and you're going to develop that confidence. But you have to have, again, realistic expectations of yourself. Lastly, I don't know, but you have to learn to depersonalize teaching. It's not life or death. It's extremely important. It's an extremely important profession, but it's not life or death. If a kid acts up in your class, if a kid calls you a name, if a kid disrespects you, That's not life or death. Depersonalize the situation. You're an authority figure, and that's why they did it. And making mistakes is how we learn. And also, risk-taking is better than doing the minimum. So just understand that you are in something that is both an art and a science. And you've got to figure out how to do it. But you also have to figure out how to do it authentically with your set of personality, your knowledge. All of that is a factor. So depersonalize it, reflect, look back. This went well, this didn't do well. It's not life or death. Don't live or die by how your days go at school, because your student teaching and your first few years are going to be a roller coaster of emotions unless you can learn to step back and depersonalize it. Plan vigorously. And I'm going to be talking about this just in about every one of these I do. But you've got to be organized. And understand that there are very few things in this profession that you can't just work your way through if you're willing to put in the work. And sometimes it's going to take that good old college kind of work where you're staying up until 3 a.m. getting it figured out. I mean, don't do that every night or you'll die. But you have to be able to be organized and plan and work your way through it. And that's going to help your self-confidence. And find your thing. You're good at something. You are naturally talented at something. You have something to bring to the table to offer your students. So whatever you're good at, let that be your focus, your first year of teaching, because that's your niche. That's your thing. And while you're doing that, develop other skills. Get help from your mentor. Get help from your instructional coach in the building. Get help from your principal. And understand that you've got a thing that you're good at, but you need to be developing a tool belt of skills that might be your weaknesses right now. But if you have the mindset of, I'm going to make this weakness my strength, then you're going to do well in our profession. That's all for today.